Call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order for Thursday, February 10th, 2022. First order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And now if we could have a moment of silence for those who have lost their lives in service to our community and to those who have passed from COVID. Thank you. Is there anyone here for public comment? Seeing none, we will move along. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes for the meeting of Thursday, January 27th, 2022.
Second.
The motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. Pat?
Yes.
Darlene?
Yes.
Mike?
Abstain?
John?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Minutes are approved. I've got nothing for appointments and hearings. I see nothing from the Board of Selectmen. I see no one from the school committee, school board. So that would get off. We have no old business. We'll move into new business. First item, before we get into the budget, are there any updates we need to be aware of, Mr. Talman?
Nothing other than the budget itself
All
and
right.
the CIP.
All right, and we will move into the budget. Gonna have you present, and then just any initial questions, and then we can talk about who we want to come in for our next meeting for further more in-depth discussion on anything. All right, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As articulated in the memo, which I will reread like I did before the select board so the folks at home can hear it. I'm obviously pleased to propose the recommended fiscal year 23 operating budget. It has been introduced to the select board and now this evening to the Finance Committee. In addition, there is a recommended capital improvement program recommendation that was unanimously endorsed by the Capital Improvement Program Committee, as Mr. Richardson can attest to. My recommendation for the operating budget is $66,016,686, or a total increase of 3.68. The department head request did total $67,226,681. The recommendation is $1,209,995 less than the requested amount. The operating budget does not add any new staffing, although you could potentially see a warrant article being prepared by departments that would result in such a proposal. I believe the deadline is Monday, the 14th. Additionally, although staffing needs are reasonably justified in my office and accounting, no additional personnel were funded, either part-time or full-time. Estimated receipts increased by $120,000 due to an increase in occupancy tax and higher Medicaid reimbursement received. Estimated new growth is projected at $700,000 after consultation with the Director of Assessing. Free cash to be utilized is $1.5 million, which is consistent with previous fiscal years. And the total estimated excess levy capacity for fiscal 23 is $2,008,702. This recommendation includes using more school choice funds to offset operating costs, consistent with the school's budget narrative of the past 3 years. The town will continue to update the revenue analysis with fiscal '23 cherry sheet figures as it proceeds through the budget and approval process. There are some pending financial considerations that I think we all need to be aware of. Number one, contract negotiations, all collective bargaining agreements, the personnel administration plan, and potentially some personal service contracts will need to be planned for, including the total cost and the length of time. In terms of sustaining operations, obviously we have some upcoming expenditures, including personnel or contractual costs that will need to be forecasted for wastewater management so that true and accurate projections are calculated in regards to our long-term financial planning. How much excess levy capacity do we want to sustain is another issue. And in terms of wastewater operations, obviously what are the estimated funds needed and the time frame to obtain. And then in regards to revenue sources, are there any new sources to identify? And staff is constantly working on those figures. A total of $3,130,905 was recommended by the CIP Committee for capital expenditures. Of the amount, $1,745,165 is recommended from free cash, while $1,385,740 is recommended from capital stabilization, which obviously, as you're well familiar with, requires a 2/3 vote. Additionally, $376,000 is being recommended from free cash for a Santuit Pond article for a diagnostic study and implementation of water quality improvements for Mashpee Wakeby. I was just told to give you an update that that number may go up just a little bit by Monday. So obviously we'll get that figure finalized for you when the article comes in. The suggestion was that this be a article on as a standalone, which it will be. So I just want to caution you that that figure could be adjusted, and I just learned that today. So, or maybe it was yesterday, but it was recent. Finally, there was some discussion regarding the HVAC system upgrades at school facilities and at town hall. That's something that is in the pipeline for long-term, or in the case of the school, short-term needs, but we don't have any proposal either for the total cost or the scope of the project at this particular time, and that was discussed at the CIP level. So that's the overview. I would essentially call this a level service budget. I think it addresses all of our mission critical needs, but at the same time, it keeps in sync with living within our means with a balanced budget and making sure that we're not putting ourselves in a perilous position in terms of finances. And I'll be more than happy to entertain some questions, or if you have any specific folks that you want to come in terms of department heads, then be more than happy to make a note of them and have them in order to explain or elaborate on anything that you may be inquiring about.
So my first question was when I was putting together the spreadsheet for the Finance Committee last night, I was looking at the department request on the information you sent us, and it was different than what we originally received. It's up by about $171,000 compared to what was given to us initially.
I think some of those adjustments were made, or I should say updated, regarding personnel-related cost in terms of wages and making sure that the numbers were where they were supposed to be.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, I got a whole bunch of them. I don't know if we want to go around the room or how we want to even it out. I don't want to dominate the Q&A.
Well, let's go in the category, what type of questions are they? Are they
They're
digging,
good
are they
questions.
digging into departments?
Some are general and some are department specific.
Okay, so the department is specific, we may want to hold off on, and ask those department heads to be here at our next meeting.
Okay.
That's what I would prefer, Mr. Chair. Like if you have a question for a particular department, be more than happy to have the department head here. Not that I can't answer it or wouldn't answer it, it's just I don't want to attempt to answer the school questions.
Right.
I'd just assume you put that off with all due respect.
Yeah, no, that was my intention, was that at our next meeting, we'll have,
And I don't want you to think I'm dodging anything.
No.
I'm more than willing to answer any question that you have. It's just, if we could just take a recess and then let me get the folks responsible for whatever the item is
right.
in.
Yeah, and that's fine with me.
Yeah.
I didn't intend tonight to drill down too much on individual departments, but it's more overview stuff. So just a couple of high-level curiosities at this point. As things stand today, knowing that things will be added to the warrant as we get closer to town meeting, are you aware of any other significant money articles that are likely that don't pertain to the budget?
Other than the one that I just mentioned, I do not. And I think you could see one for additional staffing. I don't believe we have that in yet. No. So they have until Monday, the 14th. So obviously, I have heard that one may be coming,
Okay.
but I have not seen it yet. So I would want to see what it's going to cost in terms of all of the fundamentals, the wages, the benefits. What's the full package?
Okay. I was thinking wastewater in particular.
I don't have anything on wastewater in terms of
Okay.
numbers.
Is the detail of planned expenditures, if it's approved for CIP and CPA funds, available? Line items?
You don't have the CIP items? Or did you say CPA?
See-
Well, Community Preservation Act
Yes.
funds and capital improvement.
Yeah, CIP, I thought you had.
Yes.
Yes.
Ask and you shall receive. Thank you.
I can give you a, just, I can just give you an overall breakdown. So in DPW, there was $288,500, Fire Department, $215,000, Information Technology, $50,000, Natural Resources, $180,200. All of those would be coming out of capital stabilization. And Planning and Construction, there was a little bit of a breakdown between capital stabilization and free cash. The total was $2,600,000, I'm sorry, $2,064,805. And the specific breakdown is the flooring replacement in various buildings at $89,640. That would come out of capital stabilization. The MMHS gymnasium upgrades, $75,000 out of capital stabilization. Quashnet gymnasium upgrades, capital stabilization, $155,000. And then out of free cash, DNR facility, $484,215. And then the MMHS field improvement, $1,260,950, and that's free cash as well, or that's where it stands now.
Rodney, one quick question on that, on this sheet, you have the school HVAC upgrades, but there's no amount there. Were those COVID funds they're gonna be using for that?
I'm gonna let the school answer.
Okay, thanks.
I guess I had a question related to that in your memo that you referenced earlier. At the end there, you mentioned your recommendation to study the scope of HVAC system upgrades at the schools and the town hall.
And
Does that mean you anticipate a dollar amount yet to come for the study? And would that result in actual investment in those kind of upgrades in the coming fiscal year?
good question. The town hall has had what I would describe as an antiquated system for a number of years. And essentially, we have to either have AC or heat. We can't have both like we generally have in our homes. So in May, we flip over to AC, and I think it's in the middle of October, we flip over to heat. Without fail, somebody is either too warm or too cold, depending upon what time of the season it is. We need to get the system squared away. We've been putting it off, and we've been putting it off, and I don't think we should probably put it off too much longer, primarily because this is going to be our town hall. We're not getting a new town hall. So I just as soon focus on repairing the one that we have and getting things maintained or keeping them maintained. And I think this is part and parcel to the long-term CIP planning process. With that said, I know that the school has some HVAC priorities. So what I was trying to do is to take a look at every building at the same time. And instead of doing it in piecemeal, I just as soon give you an option. One option is bonding all of them at once. You may not like that option. And I'm not talking about you personally, but the taxpayer may not like that option. So you may say, okay, this is too big of a bill in 1 year, so let's do it through an annual process. But then, obviously, there has to be priorities and so on and so forth. So I know that there's a larger scope to look at for the purposes of examining the HVAC systems.
It's a potential health issue over time.
And there's the filtering and so on and so forth, it's all relative.
So it sounds like the towns can anticipate some impact incrementally in the coming fiscal year to initiate that process.
It's some degree there will be an impact.
Okay.
And the question will be, obviously, how much do we bite off all at once? If it's all of it, it's going to be significant.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any sense yet of how our non-tax revenues are trending, both this year and as best as possible in FY '23. I mention it because at the Selectmen's meeting Monday, you'd mentioned that the marijuana revenue was much less, it sounded like, than what was
Than anticipated.
anticipated. But room occupancy and, those type of accommodation fees are kind of where they wanted to be. But we have other forms of non-tax revenue too. So how are we doing on the income side of the operating statement, so to speak?
I think I'm going to specifically defer to the finance director. I do have some numbers here, but I think she would be more up to date on where we are in general.
And if it's too early to ask that question, I understand, but I just,
Well, I
Thought
can
of-
at least provide you with some estimates based, which is what we based the budget on.
great.
So we did receive preliminary numbers from the state. It's at the governor's proposal level right now, so there are several more levels that we need to get through before the numbers are finalized. We are expecting to see, based on the governor's numbers, and if those hold, about a almost 3% overall increase in our state receipts. That's including the revenue coming in minus out the assessments, because we do have to take those into consideration. So what we'll actually, based on these figures here, what we would be receiving is about 3% higher than FY '22. We did increase our estimated receipts, and the Department of Revenue is extremely strict in our estimates. We have to justify any increase over a certain amount, and they're very cautious with that because towns have gotten themselves into trouble estimating way too high. The budgets come in, based on those estimates, and they have a shortfall. So they've become very strict as far as what they will allow us to increase. So that's all vetted through them in the recap process when we're setting the tax rate. I was able to increase the estimated receipts based on, I had to provide them with our community compact agreements for the retail and medical marijuana, because those are actual agreements that we have in place, so they allowed me to at least include those numbers in there. We did not include any marijuana. They're pretty strict nowadays as far as when you're estimating, they want you to have some history behind your estimate. They want to see you've actually received X amount of dollars. So we do not have any estimates as far as the marijuana goes, which I'm actually pretty happy about because there were so many numbers flying around beforehand. If we had based our, estimates on that, we could be in real trouble.
Yeah.
So the estimated receipts, I did increase slightly based on, as you said, the occupancy tax and some of the community compact agreements. The special revenue transfers, which they're in the omnibus motion, those are the transfers to cover street betterment debt, CPA debt, all those things. Those are pretty set. We can only use those receipts for certain items. And we do that. We're using about $500,000 in ambulance receipts, which is standard. That's what we use to offset the fire department's budget every year. I am expecting, those are the actual estimated receipts, the revenues coming in, the state revenues and the local receipts. Those are those two funding sources. We are estimating about $700,000 in new growth. After discussion with the Director of Assessing. In FY '22, it came in at $816,000. So he feels that 700 is reasonable, probably have a little bit more. If that's the case and all this were to happen as it looks right now, it would just become excess levy capacity. We wouldn't be taxing the taxpayers on that. It would just mean that we're leaving anything over on the table. Let's see. I don't know, I have recommended utilizing the $1.5 million in free cash, which is pretty standard. We had upped it in '22, just based on some conservative estimates and not really knowing how COVID was going to affect our budgets. And then I did also request that the assessor release about $40,000 in excess overlay, and that becomes basically a funding source. So we are able to do that as well. And at this point, based on the numbers as they stand, the estimated excess levy capacity, which means the amount of taxes that we could be taxing versus what we are actually taxing the taxpayers for, is about $2 million. In the 22, when we set the FY 22 tax rate, we had $2.6 million in excess levy capacity. So if all these numbers came to fruition, we would have about $600,000 less in excess levy capacity.
Very helpful, thank you.
So that 1.5 million you were talking about in free cash, that's for the budget itself? That's on top of the 1.7 for the capital improvement?
Yes.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.
So, back to the town manager, Rodney. I know you said that there were no increases in headcount planned. Yet, as I look through the budget, there are a half a dozen or so departments that show substantial salary and wage increases. Not that we have to drill down on each one of them, but, you know, when I see numbers like an HR $49,000 increase, natural resources $135,000, between fire and police another $400,000 almost, DPW $71,000. Those kind of numbers to me sort of resonate more as a addition to the staff rather than just increases in compensation. So if you could elaborate a little.
Well, the short answer is there's a couple positions that were fully authorized that have been previously adopted at town meeting
They hadn't been filled.
that hadn't been filled and hadn't been fully funded, that have been funded in this fiscal year, but I do not, and I emphasize, I do not consider that a new position. A new position would be something that we never had that we're now seeking. So I'm not trying to play word games. I'm just saying, you know, a position that was fully authorized in the past has been active in the past, but maybe not always fully funded. If all of a sudden we are funding it and replacing it, then I don't consider that a new position. A new position would be a job that has never existed, and now we're creating a job classification for a particular department and adding a person. That is not what we're doing.
Okay.
And there was a position in HR where we had a floating clerk, and the floating clerk stepped down, and we did not fill it. And obviously, as I've mentioned, there was probably a pressing need, quite frankly, to create a new part-time position in accounting and in my office just based on sheer volume. I know my staff has been frustrated, and I know accounting, which has become busier and busier, could use an extra part-time person. So essentially what I did was I said no to those, but I said I will fund the floating clerk, which was an old position, and try to have that person be shared so that we can try to stretch it out a little bit. That's what happened. But that's not a new position. It was a position that always existed.
Okay. Thank you. That answers that. So when the fiscal year starts in July, do these increased amounts anticipate that all of those previously approved staffing positions would be filled at that time? In other words, would it be for the whole year?
I'd have to...
Or do we know yet?
I'd have to double check. I do not know off the top of my head of any position that exists full-time that isn't fully funded,
Okay.
based on this budget. But I'd want to just double-check just to be on the safe side.
But even some of the ones that are approved, whether they're fully funded or not, they might not already be on the payroll as we speak.
Say that again?
In other words, you say some of these numbers reflect approved positions that have not yet, that the hires have not been made for, but they're anticipated.
Yes.
So my question is, have we hired half of the ones that we plan to or approved in the past?
I don't know.
Or all of them, or-
I don't know the number off the top of my head. If I knew that, then I'd be making a lot more money in a different job.
As well you should be, so. Okay, so.
But what I can tell you, without being funny, is I think what you're trying to drill down to is whether or not these numbers are an accurate reflection of what we're going to need to fund all the positions. And the short answer is, to the best of my knowledge, generally yes, but where we could end up having a difference is like, we've got an assessor who's retiring. We have a council on aging director who's retiring, or has retired, I should say. And we've got a fire chief that's retiring. So we have to budget something. So we do that, and I don't want to show my hand, but at the same time, I got to budget something. So when these people are hired, if I can hire them at a less rate, then obviously that's what I hope to do.
Right.
But a lot of it's driven by the market. If the person can go next door and make $20,000 more a year, then, and we have a good, competent, capable person that we can hire, then you have to balance everything out.
Yeah, we've gone through this. We know theoretically where Mashpee sits within the competition, so to speak. And you've always made it known that you're not looking to be the top town.
Right.
Clearly not the bottom town, but someplace in the middle.
Yep.
So, which makes a
That-
hell of a lot of sense.
That hasn't changed. I can tell you that we always try to strive for the median. We don't want to be the top on Cape Cod, but we don't want to be the bottom. And that will continue to be the practice for as long as I'm manager. And in terms of the contract negotiations, obviously they're coming up this year. And there's a lot of things that we have to plan for. Inflation is much higher than it has been in previous years. The cost of living is much higher than it has been in previous years. I don't want taxes to be going up any more than you do, but on the same, but by the same token, we have to pay our personnel a reasonable wage for the job that they're doing, whatever that may entail.
Agreed. Thank you. And then the last thing that I have, just in general, first of all, kudos to you for shaving $1 million off of the requested amounts. And I think we all know, certainly I do, and appreciate that there's not much, if any, fat in the town of Mashpee, both with respect to personnel and operating costs and so on. I'm impressed that we run a lean, stable ship as best as we can under the circumstances, and knowing also that the wish list of things and/or people that we would like to have will probably never be fulfilled, and that you just indicated it's kind of a balancing act to find a midpoint that is as productive as it can be. Yet, the result of all of that is, when you go back a few years, you know, typically we add about $2 to $3 million a year to our operating budget. And on a percentage basis, you know, there's nothing exotic. So I think that's a compliment to everybody that has a hand in putting all this together. But by the same token, you can project, 2 years from now, another 2 to 3 million, and 3 years, another 2 to 3 million. So even if not too much changes, and we know that things will change because of wastewater infrastructure and, other expensive infrastructure-related needs that the town either now has or will identify in the future. So it's not too hard to speculate, if we looked out 5 or 10 years, how many tens of millions of dollars would probably be added when we look 10 years down the road. And it probably therefore becomes more important than ever to be extra diligent in opportunities that don't create sort of a perpetual annuity for our operating cost as we move ahead during town. Maybe I'm naive and there's no way to avoid that happening. But as we sit here today, knowing we were at around 55 million in 2019, then 57, then 63, and now 66, next year is going to be 69 or 70, and so on and so forth. That's not unique to Mashpee. Every municipality in the country is going through these kinds of issues. So I'm just putting in my pitch because I think it's part of my job description to not just be as diligent as we can on the FY23 budget, but realizing that's a springboard for what's going to follow that, the year after, the 5 years after, the 10 years after, and so forth. So thank you for indulging me.
Well, I guess that's not a question, but I will say, in response to the statement in general, and I would say this to any finance committee, we are at a point where you either raise taxes, or you reduce services, or you enhance revenue. And enhancing revenue is a controversial subject for some folks, and I'm not taking any sides. I'm just simply saying that if we are not going to do certain things, then it's going to cost us more money in the end to maintain operations. Or we need to look at the third alternative, which is to reduce services. So I think collectively as a community, we need to hear what services can you do without. I trust it's generally not plowing the streets or having a police officer respond in case of a disturbance, or having an ambulance show up in case of a medical emergency. So what is it? What can we do without? And it's easy to sometimes say, well, we got to do something, but what is that something? Because those are essentially the three options. And in the big picture, and I've said this before as well, we're certainly at a point where the majority of all of our costs are related to what? Personnel. I don't believe that we could make any reductions without jeopardizing mission-critical needs in expenses. So it now comes down to personnel. And if we were to reduce personnel, what services can the people live without? And if they can collectively say, I can live without this, I can live without that, then that's something for a greater conversation. I shouldn't say greater, a more in-depth conversation.
Well, looking at the CIP requests over years, and this is not something that necessarily everybody sees all the time, but when you're talking a total years from now, 25 or so $million, every year we come up with a number that's very acceptable relative to the ask, so to speak. And that's not even on the compensation side. So, this isn't stuff necessarily that gets into part and parcel of our discussion, but we've already talked about saving something like $19 million off a request of CIP this year alone.
But on the capital side, I would guess a lot of that is, for the next fiscal year, you're saying, what can we live without next year? knowing that it's probably gonna resurface again the year after that, so.
What I'm making is every year we say, what can we live without again this
Right.
year? And again
But you
this
can't
year,
do
so-
that forever, because
No,
eventually
you
you're gonna
can't,
need it.
but I mean,
so.
but my point I'm making is, it's not, you're just writing a check, we're just looking at everything in
And-
detail.
and
that's
some-
all, not on the compensation side.
And some of these decisions are obviously not easy.
Oh, no.
But you do pay me the big bucks to make those decisions, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank the finance team, specifically the finance director, and I'm not saying this because she's sitting behind me, it's because I rely
Glad you're
very,
there to hear it.
well, I rely very heavily on her data, and I rely very heavily on her providing me with timely and accurate information. And she does it all, and she does it very competently, very thoroughly. And what I guess impresses me is she will say, this is option one, this is option two, this is option three, your choice. And I am generally looking at making the reductions that aren't going to be hurtful, maintain operations at a level, operational level of the prior year, and at the same time, keep in perspective that we do have a limitation, which you reference, and I trust you'll continue to reference, and I respect that. And I don't think I ever met a person cheaper in my entire life than my father, and that's the way he brought me up. I'm a big spender compared to him, God rest his soul, but I certainly learned to always live with less because he pounded it into my head. So it's not that I'm not conscientious of that. I want to assure you of that.
I've sensed the genetics.
Question, you mentioned a couple of times the contract negotiations. Will that affect the 23 or the 24 budget?
Well, it will impact 24, but obviously, you know, we try to set some money aside in anticipation of what the potential estimates will be.
Okay, because I was thinking 23's, we were in a 3-year contract, and 23's the
Right.
final year of that.
Right.
Okay, so just make sure I'm thinking clearly on that.
Is the medical insurance an estimate, or is that a real number at this point?
That's another good question. And I don't want you to think that we just inflate these numbers initially. We go by what we think the worst-case scenario would be, and we hope for the best-case scenario. We knew that we weren't going to get another year of zero. I mean, we just weren't. So the number that is plugged in there is real. At least, I think they've got the update, right? Yeah, you've got the update.
Yeah.
So that's a real number, and that's obviously a significant part of what we can reduce, because if you take a look at what that number was budgeted at, obviously, it's reduced by the amount that is the real figure. But I don't want you to think that, oh, we just throw some crazy figure in there to make it look like we're slashing everything. The reality is, in a worst-case scenario, if we don't have it, we're in trouble.
Yeah, no, I didn't think that at all, but it seems to me in the past that we normally know what that number is before town
Yeah,
meeting,
we didn't.
so.
And I tried searching for that number through a couple of contacts, and we couldn't get the number until just recently.
Okay. Well, you average that out over the last 2 years, it's 4.5% roughly. So
Oh, if you average it out, I'm very happy with that number.
yeah, absolutely.
I am
Absolutely.
totally happy with that number.
All right.
The only other thing, Mr. Chair, is if you could just communicate with me in terms of any department heads that you would like to have in, because I trust that you may have a conversation after I leave. And if you want somebody to come in, or a particular department that you have a question about, I think it would be helpful to just do them methodically. We may not want everybody to come in on one night, you know, maybe, and I'm not telling you
no.
how to run your meeting. I'm just saying, maybe if we could divvy them up, and then I'll touch base with you and,
Well, what I was going to ask is first of all, are there any other further questions for the town manager at this moment?
Yeah, I do have one, Rodney. The Cape Cod Tech, on that tuition, is that per student or is that a set fee for the year?
it
In
is
other words,
based
whether
on
we
the
send-
number, there's a ratio based on the number of students that we have. Do you want to elaborate on that? So that number could go up or down, depending
Okay.
on how many students we have.
I wasn't sure if it was a set fee, whether you send one child or you send 100 children. That's right.
That will affect our fee.
Okay.
Right, it is per student,
It is per student. Okay.
yes. So
Yeah.
they are estimating, the enrollment for FY '23 is going to go, this is from the Cape Cod Regional Tech High School, from 44 students this year to 51 students next year.
Oh, it's going back up.
It's going back up.
Yeah.
And they just finished the whole, the new school, so I don't know if that has something to do with it. So our assessment went from 978,770 to 1,011,446. And it's based on the total enrollment and then they break it down by town, percentage-wise.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That'll probably continue to trend upward, I would think, given the demand for
I would
trade.
hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would hope so. That's, in today's world,
yeah.
with a lack of skilled people out there, it's an opportunity for so many children that college isn't for everyone. And this type of thing is just marvelous, to be sending children there to give them skills, because they're too young to make those decisions just to get a degree from college for $200,000 or $300,000 that they can't do anything with.
No, that, try to find a plumber or electrician.
All the skilled trades,
You always
it's,
need a plumber or an electrician.
Yeah, right.
Any further questions? All right, the next thing I want to know is, are there any departments you know now you want to have come in to ask them further questions? So for me, the school department,
I was gonna say, school.
I'd like to see a detailed presentation of what their budget entails.
School, yeah.
Yeah, and I would vote for DPW, particularly the part of it that pertains to the schools, but just in general,
Okay.
as well as natural resources.
All right.
Is that it?
fine with me.
I would just in school, that's all. for me.
Okay, so that's it for right now?
All right, so I've got three.
Yep.
School, DPW, natural resources, and I'll coordinate with you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent, that sounds great. And if anybody, when they've had time to go through this a little bit more, if there's anybody else you want to come in, let me know, and I'll work with Mr. Collins to work that out.
All right.
All right?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very
Thank you all
much.
for coming in.
Thank you. All right.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks again.
Good night.
Thank you, Don.
I know.
All right. I've got nothing else on the agenda. One thing that I will have for our next meeting for everybody to approve, I got a email today. I've got to write the report for the annual report for the town, the finance committee. I got to write that. I found out today it's supposed to be due on Monday.
Have a nice weekend.
Yeah, sorry, I've got other things I gotta, other work-related stuff I gotta do, it's not getting done. I've got her I've got an extension till the 25th, the day after our meeting on the 24th. So I'll have it written and sent to everybody, and we can approve it on the 24th. Is there anything else anybody else has?
No, the budget calendar is still as we see it, I gather.
So, yes, I haven't heard of any changes
Yeah,
to that.
it wouldn't likely change anyway, I guess.
No.
but- Okay.
All right, so our next meeting will be on the 24th. Plan on meeting, questioning the departments we're having coming in. Any other questions that you have may arise that you, if we can get them to Mr. Collins ahead of time. Even questions that we may want to give the department heads to have them prepared. Send it to me and I'll get it to him and we'll get everything so we can.
One thing I
finish
am
this
curious
smoothly.
about, because they talked about the HVAC for the schools. With the federal money, wasn't that one of the big selling points, that they were going to give this money to schools for ventilation systems?
Well, that's what he was talking about.
Yes, so is that on a DPW or a school?
Schools, and we talked about that at the CIP meeting.
Yeah.
And he didn't go into it in any great deal of detail, but there's probably some school choice money and some other stuff that is there that might be kind of sitting there anticipating to get some information about that. Because, that's a health thing, the kids.
Yeah, well, that's what the big push was,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm
that
not,
they were going to give this money so we have the
They said
ventilations.
they have a hard time with these kids even studying. The air conditioning is not working and it's so hot, so it's
Well,
gonna be
that's
tough.
what-
Not to mention masks.
I worry about, frankly, I worry about what we haven't heard yet that is out there about the water, all the ponds,
Well-
and everything they're trying to do to counter some of the thing that's going on. I mean, none of that stuff has been budgeted for, not too much of it anyways, and it's out there. I mean, and then now the ponds are getting little groups together, Santuit and Mashpee Wakeby and Shumet, all their own little committees, and they're all trying to vie for position on who's gonna get what first. That's gonna be a bad, long-term situation, I'm afraid. So I don't know whether that's gonna impact the budget or not, by budget time.
well,
Just worry about
it does appear from what I've read that the 43 million that's coming to Barnstable County, or has already arrived, I guess, the county commissioners are polling residents to find out what they think. The consensus so far seems to be distributed based on population. And in the absence of any more equitable way, that's probably the way it's going to go. So you can do the math, but that's a pretty substantial chunk of funds. And then I think each town, with whatever amount they get, can utilize it any way they see fit, as long as it's in the parameters of the pandemic realities. But I've never been too clear on, there has been money, as we all know, that's come to the town already. A lot of it earmarked for the schools, for mitigation issues. And I think that money comes, I don't know if it comes to the school or to the town, but where it's a facilities issue, it's the DPW that does the work or arranges for the work. So,
think that's
and I
what we
think
have
there
to
had
find
been
out.
some work on the mechanical systems at the school, throughout this whole process. But obviously, that's not an overhaul of the whole system to optimize it. So I think there's probably been some substantial expenditures already to make it a healthier environment.
Well, that's why we have to ask the questions.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that was the big federal push, that they were going to, it was for ventilation for children to get them back in the classrooms, which they never should have been out of anyways, in my opinion. But, I mean, so did that money come in, and is this part of what we're doing here? I mean, that's what has to be answered by somebody.
It takes like a pandemic to make you realize that the air that everybody's breathing should be looked at a little bit closer.
Yeah. And I just want to know, we were promised funds, have the funds come in, or are we picking it up with empty promises from Washington? That's my question.
Anyway, I think that's gonna be something we'll deal with.
Yep, okay.
All right, we'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second?
All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.